Hi, I'm ThatKidDouglas, and today's a monumentous occasion because this channel just hit the 500 subscriber mark. Thank you so much to everyone who subscribed to my channel and has supported me over the last 10 years. You guys are the reason why I do what I do, and wow, it's utterly amazing. What can I say? So for those of you who have been rocking with me from the very beginning, thank you so much. I thoroughly appreciate your support, and for those of you who have subscribed just recently, welcome to my world. In order to celebrate this momentous occasion, I am launching a brand new series called The Super Awesome Countdown Show, where I make top 10 lists about just about everything. Video games, music, movies, TV, business, technology, anything goes. And what better way to kick off this new series than with a list on the top 10 biggest business blunders. I hope you enjoy this new series. Thank you so much for subscribing to my channel and supporting me, and without further ado, take it away.
The world of business is like a game of Russian roulette. You either win or lose it all. I'm pretty sure the people responsible for these horrible business decisions would rather not relive their mistakes, but as the saying goes, those who forget their history are doomed to repeat it. I'm ThatKidDouglas, and in honor of this channel reaching the 500 subscriber mark, I thought it would be fun to count down the top 10 biggest business blunders. Let's get started. Number 10. Paramount's failed Marvel trap. Our story begins in the City of Stars, where the Little Mountain studio on Melrose Avenue made one of the worst business decisions in Hollywood history. Comic book publisher Marvel Entertainment had been licensing out its properties for film adaptations to various studios since the 90s. The successes of Blade, X-Men, and Spider-Man proved there was a viable market for comic book movies, and Marvel wanted a piece of the pie, so they decided to form their own studio, simply called Marvel Studios. They teamed up with Paramount for distribution, and it resulted in 2008's Iron Man, which was a huge hit both critically and commercially, and solidified the Marvel Cinematic Universe as a blockbuster franchise to be reckoned with. Paramount's relationship with Marvel was so tight that when CEO Ike Perlmutter was looking to sell the company, Paramount got first dibs. Yes, you heard that correctly. Paramount had the opportunity to buy Marvel outright, but nothing ever happened because Viacom CEO at the time, Philippe Dowman, refused to provide the funding to make it happen because he was too focused on stock buybacks and an ongoing lawsuit with YouTube. These two factors put a huge drain on the company's finances, which made Dowman unwilling to give Paramount the resources it needed to compete on the tentpole stage. This turned out to be a huge mistake that would cost the company billions of dollars. Disney took full advantage of the opportunity and bought Marvel for $4 billion. Fast forward 8 years later, and the MCU is now the highest grossing film franchise of all time, with over $10 billion at the worldwide box office. And Marvel's dominance isn't just limited to film, it's comics, television, merchandising, theme parks, and video games. All of that money could have gone straight to Viacom, but instead their stock prices took a huge nosedive. Dowman was ousted from the company, and Paramount has been reduced to a joke at this point. Viacom didn't see the value in the MCU, and for this blunder they missed out on staking their claim to one of the most lucrative film franchises ever. Number 9. Yahoo rejects Microsoft. It's hard to believe that Yahoo was once a titan of the internet age, with a market value of over $100 billion, but they were. Internet companies were booming in the 90s and everyone wanted a piece of the pie, which is what caused the market to collapse on itself. A disaster of Y2K proportions known as the dot-com bubble. Stocks in internet companies dropped like a rock, with Yahoo being one of the hardest hit. Its shares dropped from $118.75 a share to $8.11. This unfortunate turn of events is something Yahoo would never be able to recover from, and then 8 years later they received the unthinkable, an offer for acquisition from none other than Microsoft itself. The price, $44 billion. Any sensible person would happily accept the offer, but they did something that defies quantifiable logic. They rejected the offer, stating that it substantially undervalued the company and that it wasn't in the best interest of its shareholders. The board of directors are probably kicking themselves for not accepting the offer because Yahoo was never worth that much again began. In the following years, they continued to flounder as their value was deemed worthless by Wall Street. They went through 4 CEOs in 6 years, and its $1 billion purchase of Tumblr turned out to be a huge waste of money. In the end, Yahoo reached the end of the line as an independent company and sold its core internet business to Verizon Communications for $4.8 billion. Everything else, including their stakes in Alibaba and Yahoo Japan, were spun off into an independent investment company called Altaba. Verizon plans to merge Yahoo with another titan of the internet age, AOL, which it acquired in 2015. Under the leadership of Verizon, there's potential for the Yahoo brand to make a comeback and become relevant again, or it could go the way of MySpace and fade into obscurity. Number 8. Eisner's Fahrenheit. Disney is often seen as a company that can do no wrong, but even they make horrible business decisions from time to time. The year was 2004, and controversial documentary filmmaker Michael Moore was gearing up to release his latest film, Fahrenheit 9/11. Bob and Harvey Weinstein of Miramax Films loved the film and wanted to distribute it through their company, but Disney CEO Michael Eisner just had to come in and ruin everything. What does Eisner have to do with this, you may ask? Miramax was owned by Disney at the time, and since Disney is primarily a family entertainment company, they didn't want their brand being associated with political stuff. Miramax financed the film without Disney's knowledge, and when Eisner heard about this, he ordered Miramax to drop the film, but the Weinsteins fought back, stating that the film's $6 million production budget was far below the estimate they needed to get Disney's approval on it. They went back and forth on it for a while until Eisner eventually gained the support of the Disney board to prevent Miramax from distributing the film. This was because it was highly critical of US President George W. Bush. Despite the setback, the film would eventually release on June 25, 2004, and unfortunately for Eisner, it turned out to be a huge hit, grossing $222 million worldwide, making it the highest grossing documentary film of all time. This blunder, among many other things, was the reason Eisner was eventually ousted from Disney. He was replaced by his second-in-command, Bob Iger, in 2005, and the company hasn't looked back since. Don't feel too bad for him, though. He received a golden parachute and has a building named after him on the Disney lot in Burbank, so there's no need to play a world's smallest violin joke. He can wipe his tears with $100 bills while thinking about this horrible business decision. Number 7. Nickelodeon passes on Adventure Time. Do you like watching Adventure Time on Cartoon Network? It's damn good, right? Well, if Nickelodeon executives believed in the show's potential, it's very possible that it would have landed on the big N as opposed to the big CN. Pendleton, Ward, and Federator Studios teamed up to produce the pilot for Adventure Time and pitched it to Nickelodeon in 2007. They pitched it not once, but twice, and in both cases, Nick executives rejected the pilot. They decided to go with their second choice, Fanboy and Chum Chum, and greenlit that as a series instead. Despite the rejection, Ward and Federator didn't give up. They pitched the series to Cartoon Network and they loved it. When Adventure Time premiered on Cartoon Network in 2010, it single-handedly brought the network back to its former glory and kick-started a new golden age of cartoons in the process. It also spawned a multimedia franchise that includes several video games, merchandise, and an upcoming feature film at Warner Brothers Animation. Nickelodeon, on the other hand, is a shadow of their former self. Its ratings have significantly declined in the last few years, and ironically, Fanboy and Chum Chum was cancelled after 2 seasons. Adventure Time could have turned Nick's fortunes around, but instead their stubbornness made them lose out on one of the most popular cartoons of the modern era. At least they still have SpongeBob. Number 6. Microsoft's Xbox One reveal. When Microsoft revealed the Xbox One in 2013, it was designed to be a very forward-thinking console, which perfectly explains why they spent the first 30 minutes of their reveal event talking about TV.
Television, TV. Xbox is about to become the next water cooler.
Here's my center, Tyson Chandler, and here's how he helps me dominate.
The Xbox One was pitched as an all-in-one entertainment platform. They wanted it to be your cable box, your Netflix watcher, your Pornhub viewer. Okay, I made the last one up, but you get the point. There were barely any games to speak of unless you count the cringeworthy section involving Call of Duty Ghosts and Fish as a game. In the eyes of many, it was clear that the Xbox One had media as its main focus, while games were a far distant second. Needless to say, the reactions to the reveal event were overwhelmingly negative, and the fan outcry would grow even louder when additional details were revealed, such as needing to check in every 24 hours and the console being effectively crippled if it wasn't connected online. Basically, if you lived in the boonies with terrible internet or no internet to speak of, you were screwed. Not to mention, you couldn't even trade in your games at retail, with the console being specifically designed to block used games. These misguided decisions left the door wide open for Sony to dominate the current console generation. All they had to do was say, hey, you guys know what Microsoft is doing? Well, we're not doing that. With Sony's public E3 announcement that they were a pro gamer, the PS4 became the console of choice and the Xbox One was mocked as a vaporware disaster just waiting to happen. A week after E3, Microsoft pulled a 180, removed the controversial policies, and rebranded it as a traditional console with games as its focus. Don Mattrick was ousted as president of the Interactive Entertainment Division and was replaced by Phil Spencer, who's done a remarkable job getting the Xbox brand back on track. And while Xbox One sales pale in comparison to that of the PS4, we can all agree that the Xbox brand is in a much better place now than it was in 2013. Number 5. Eisner snubs Katzenberg. When Michael Eisner came into power at Disney in 1984, he brought along one of the executives he worked with at Paramount, Jeffrey Katzenberg, to run the Walt Disney Studios as chairman. With his tyrannical taskmaster reputation, he brought Disney Animation back from the dark abyss it had been in for years, and was one of the key players behind the legendary run of films we know today as the Disney Renaissance. His tenure at Disney ended after the tragic death of President Frank Wells. You see, Katzenberg assumed that Eisner would promote him to the vacant president position, but Eisner refused to promote him and took the presidency for himself. Katzenberg was so angered by this perceived slighting that he resigned from the company in August 1994. 2 months later, he formed DreamWorks SKG with Steven Spielberg and David Geffen, where he vowed to compete hard with Disney in feature animation, and he stayed true to that proclamation with the release of Shrek in 2001. It was cynical, it was edgy, it was irreverent, it was slightly adult, and it took the decades-old concept of fairy tales and gave it a modern ogre-infused twist. It represented everything Disney was at the time: old, stodgy, and downright uncool. Shrek became a huge success, grossing $484 million worldwide, spawning a film franchise that would solidify DreamWorks Animation as a force to be reckoned with in feature animation. It would then go on to beat Monsters, Inc. at the Oscars in the newly installed Best Animated Feature category. DWA finally gave Disney meaningful competition in feature animation. Disney Animation, on the other hand, had a terrible decade, releasing duds like Treasure Planet and Home on the Range, while computer animated films became a thing. To date, DWA's films have grossed $13.8 billion worldwide. Not bad for a man who once referred to his former boss as Lord Farquaad. Sorry, Lord Farquaad.
So, that must be Lord Farquaad's castle.
That's the place.
Do you think maybe he's compensating for something?
Number 4. Disney passes on Star Wars. While the Star Wars franchise is now the property of the Walt Disney Company, the House of Mouse could have secured the keys to the galaxy much earlier. In the 1970s, George Lucas conceived the idea for a space opera epic known as Star Wars. He pitched the concept to various Hollywood studios. One of them was Disney, who rejected the idea, primarily because sci-fi films at the time had a very low track record of success. The project would eventually land at 20th Century Fox, and when it released on May 25, 1977, it became an instant pop culture phenomenon, not only changing the way movies were made, but also birthing the concept of the blockbuster. Realizing their enormous mistake, Disney released their own sci-fi films, The Black Hole and Tron, in an attempt to outdo Star Wars, which never really happened. Luckily, this story has a happy ending. Disney would collaborate with Lucas on a Disneyland attraction called Star Tours, and through that they slowly gained his trust, so much so that when he was ready to sell his production company Lucasfilm, and with it the Star Wars franchise, the only company he ever considered selling it to was Disney. The $4 billion purchase would ultimately benefit both sides. Lucas got to ride off into the sunset and enjoy his retirement, and Disney got a hugely successful franchise that brings them one step closer to their goal of becoming Skynet. And if you watch The Force Awakens and Rogue One, then you know that the franchise is in good hands. No wonder why Fox News is so salty these days. Number 3. Rothman doesn't get Deadpool. The zany, off-the-wall Marvel Comics character Deadpool made his first film appearance in the critically reviled X-Men Origins Wolverine, where his mouth was sewn shut. You heard that correctly. The merc with a mouth had his mouth sewn shut. He also shoots laser beams from his eyes because Deadpool is not Deadpool. Deadpool is Cyclops. Fox put a solo Deadpool movie into development, albeit with a total reboot that would ignore the events of X-Men Origins Wolverine, to bring him closer in tone to the comics. Rhett Reese and Paul Wernick were hired to write, and visual effects specialist Tim Miller was hired to direct. A proof of concept was created in 2011 to show what the finished film would look like. It was then pitched to the co-chairman and CEO of 20th Century Fox, Tom Rothman, who soundly rejected it because he didn't get it. The film remained stuck in development hell until 2014 when the test footage was leaked online. It received overwhelmingly positive reception for its crazy, over-the-top action and its pitch-perfect tone that nailed the Deadpool character to a T. For its part, Fox screened the film 24 hours after the leak and officially announced it in September. Deadpool released on February 12, 2016, and it became the highest-grossing R-rated film of all time, grossing $782 million worldwide. As for Rothman, he was ousted from Fox in September 2012 and would go on to run another movie studio, Sony Pictures. That should tell you everything you need to know about Rothman's decision-making. Number 2. The Nintendo PlayStation. Nintendo and Sega were bitter rivals in the 90s during the 16-bit era as the Super Nintendo and Genesis both battled for supremacy. And then, seemingly out of nowhere, Sega revealed its latest technological innovation, the Sega CD, a system that supported a brand new format, the CD-ROM. Not wanting to be left behind, Nintendo decided to make their own CD-based system and teamed up with fellow Japanese company Sony to develop it. Ken Kutaragi and his team created a prototype for the system called the Nintendo PlayStation. It was a hybrid console that would have played both SNES cartridges and CD-ROM games. The project was officially announced at 1991 CES to heavy fanfare. However, behind the scenes, Nintendo had second thoughts about its collaboration with Sony. Nintendo retained all the profits from cartridge sales, while Sony retained all the profits from CD sales. It was clear that CDs were going to become the dominant format as they were far cheaper to produce than cartridges. Furthermore, Sony retained complete control over the licensing and manufacturing, which meant Nintendo signed themselves out of a rather significant sum of money. They secretly cut ties with Sony and partnered with rival electronics company Philips. The very next day, Nintendo shocked the world by announcing it was teaming up with Philips to make a CD-based system called the CDI. Needless to say, the backstabbing didn't go over very well with the higher-ups at Sony. In fact, Sony's president at the time, Norio Oka, was so furious about Nintendo's sudden betrayal that he ordered the PlayStation project to continue purely as a way to get back at Nintendo, and they did just that. Sony released the PlayStation on December 3rd, 1994 in Japan and September 9th, 1995 in North America, and the rest, as they say, is history. The PlayStation brand became one of the most dominant forces in the world of video games, while Nintendo, with the exception of the Wii, has been lagging behind ever since. Ouch. Karma is most definitely a bitch. Before we get to number 1, here are a few honorable mentions. Number 1. AOL Time Warner. Dawn of Divorce. It's often regarded as the worst deal in business history and used as a textbook example of a merger gone horribly wrong. In the magical year of 2000, internet titan AOL made a deal to buy media giant Time Warner for $164 billion. At the time, the deal made a lot of sense. AOL was a powerhouse on the internet, and Time Warner was a powerhouse in media, and many thought that the two of them together was an unbeatable combination. What could possibly go wrong? Well, nothing big really, just a little thing called the dot-com bubble. Stocks in internet companies tanked across the board, and to make matters even worse, all of this went down before the ink was even dry on the deal, which is why the new company's $360 billion value diminished within a few years. AOL was too slow to change and evolve with the times, as most of their revenue came from dial-up subscriptions, while everyone else was moving to high-speed broadband. The wildly different cultures of AOL and Time Warner were also a point of contention that ultimately led to the demise of the merger. All of this bad luck led to an astonishing $99 billion loss in 2002, the largest ever recorded in corporate history, which caused the value of the company to shrink to $20 billion. By 2003, the jig was up. Time Warner dropped AOL from its name and then 6 years later spun them off as an independent company, officially putting an end to the worst deal in business history. The deal was supposed to be revolutionary. It was supposed to change the media landscape forever. The only thing it ended up being was a colossal failure. They overpromised and underdelivered, which easily makes AOL Time Warner the biggest business blunder of all time.